The Wrecker Part 3 by Robert Louis Stevenson. Chapter 23. The Budget of the Currency Lass. Before noon on the 26th November, there cleared from the port of Sydney the schooner Currency Lass. The owner, Norris Carthew, was on board in the somewhat unusual position of mate. The master's name purported to be William Kirkup. The cook was a Hawaiian boy, Joseph Amalu, and there were two hands before the mast, Thomas Haddon and Richard Hempstead, the latter chosen partly because of his humble character, partly because he had an odd job man's handiness with tools. The Currency Lass was bound for the South Sea Islands, and first of all for Botaritari in the Gilberts, on a register. But it was understood about the harbor that her cruise was more than half a pleasure trip. A friend of the late Grant Sanderson, the Vaucian Truman in Kilclarty, might have recognized in that tall-masted ship the transformed and rechristened Dream, and the Lloyd surveyor, had the services of such a one been called in requisition, must have found abundant subject of remark. For time, during her 3 years in action, had eaten deep into the Dream, and her fittings, she had sold in consequence a shade above her value as old junk, and the three adventurers had scarce been able to afford even the most vital repairs. The rigging, indeed, had been partly renewed and the rest set up. All Grant Sanderson's old canvas had been patched together into one decently serviceable suit of sails. Grant Sanderson's masts still stood and might have wondered at themselves. "I haven't the heart to tap them," Captain Wicks used to observe, as he squinted up their height or patted their rotundity. And, as rotten as our foremast was an accepted metaphor in the ship's company, the sequel rather suggests it may have been sounder than was thought. But no one knew for certain, just as no one except the captain appreciated the dangers of the cruise. The captain, indeed, saw with clear eyes and spoke his mind aloud. And though a man of an astonishing hot-blooded courage, following life and taking its dangers in the spirit of a hound upon the slot, he had made a point of a big whaleboat. "Take your choice," he had said, "either new masts and rigging or that boat. I simply ain't going to sea without the one or the other. Chicken coops are good enough, no doubt, and so is a dinghy, but they ain't for Joe." And his partners had been forced to consent, and saw 36 pounds of their small capital vanish in the turn of a hand. All four had toiled the best part of 6 weeks getting ready, and though Captain Wicks was of course not seen or heard of, a fifth was there to help them, a fellow in a bushy red beard, which he would sometimes lay aside when he was below, and who strikingly resembled Captain Wicks in voice and character. As for Captain Kirkup, he did not appear till the last moment, when he proved to be a burly mariner, bearded like Abu Ben Adhem, all the way down the harbor and through the heads. His milk-white whiskers blew in the wind and were conspicuous from shore. But the Currency Lass had no sooner turned her back upon the lighthouse than he went below for the inside of 5 seconds and reappeared clean-shaven. So many doublings and devices were required to get to. Sea with an unseaworthy ship and a captain that was wanted. Nor might even these have sufficed, but for the fact that Haddon was a public character, and the whole cruise regarded with an eye of indulgence as one of Tom's engaging eccentricities. The ship, besides, had been a yacht before, and it came the more natural to allow her still some of the dangerous liberties of her old employment. A strange ship they had made of it, her lofty spars disfigured with patched canvas, her paneled cabin fitted for a trader room with rude shelves. And the life they led in that anomalous schooner was no less curious than herself. Amalu alone berthed forward. The rest occupied staterooms, camped upon the satin divans, and sat down in Grant Sanderson's parquetry smoking room to meals of junk and potatoes, bad of their kind and often scant in quantity. Hempstead grumbled. Tommy had occasional moments of revolt and increased the ordinary by a few haphazard tins or a bottle of his own brown sherry. But Hempstead grumbled from habit. Tommy revolted only for the moment, and there was, underneath, the real and general acquiescence in these hardships. For besides onions and potatoes, the currency lass may be said to have gone to sea without stores. She carried £2,000 worth of assorted trade, advanced on credit, their whole hope and fortune. It was upon this that they subsisted, mice, in their own granary. They dined upon their future profits, and every scanty meal was so much in the savings bank. Republican as were their manners, there was no practical, at least no dangerous, lack of discipline. Wicks was the only sailor on board, there was none to criticize, and besides, he was so easy-going and so merry-minded that none could bear to disappoint him. Cardew did his best, partly for the love of doing it, partly for love of the captain. Amalu was a willing drudge, and even Hempstead and Haddon turned to upon occasion with a will. Tommy's department was the trade and traderoom. He would work down in the hold or over the shelves of the cabin till the Sydney dandy was unrecognizable. Come up at last, draw a bucket of sea. Water, bathe, change, and lie down on deck over a big sheaf of Sidney Herald Sand dead birds, or perhaps with a volume of Buckle's History of Civilization, the standard work selected for that cruise. In the latter case, a smile went round the ship, for Buckle almost invariably laid his student out, and when Tom awoke again he was almost always in the humor for brown sherry. The connection was so well established that a glass of Buckle, or a bottle of civilization, became current pleasantries on board the Currency Lass. Hempstead's province was that of the repairs, and he had his hands full. Nothing on board but was decayed in a proportion. The lamps leaked, so did the decks. Door knobs came off in the hand, moldings parted company with the panels, the pump declined to suck, and the defective bathroom came near to swamp the ship. Wicks insisted that all the nails were long ago consumed, and that she was only glued together by the rust. "You shouldn't make me laugh so much, Tommy," he would say. "I'm afraid I'll shake the sternpost out of her." And as Hempstead went to and fro with his tool basket on an endless round of tinkering, Wicks lost no opportunity of chaffing him upon his duties. "If you turn to it sailoring or washing paint or something useful, now," he would say, "I could see the fun of it. But to be mending things that haven't no insides to them appears to me the height of foolishness." And doubtless these continual pleasantries helped to reassure the landsman, who went to and fro unmoved, under circumstances that might have daunted Nelson. The weather was from the outset splendid, and the wind fair and steady. The ship sailed like a witch. "This Currency Lass is a powerful old girl, and has more complaints than I would care to put a name on," the captain would say as he pricked the chart, "but she could show her blooming heels to anything of her size in the Western Pacific. To wash decks, relieve the wheel, do the day's work after dinner on the smoking-room table, and take in kites at night, such was the easy routine of their life." In the evening, above all, if Tommy had produced some of his civilization yarns and music were the rule. Amalu had a sweet Hawaiian voice, and Hempstead, a great hand upon the banjo, accompanied his own quavering tenor with effect. There was a sense in which the little man could sing. It was great to hear him deliver "My Boy Tammy" in Australian, and the words some of the worst of the ruffian McNails were hailed in his version with inextinguishable mirth. "Where ha' ye been a die?" he would ask, and answer himself. "I've been by burn and flowery Bry, meadow green and mountain gry, Cortino. Dis young thing just come fry her mammy." It was the accepted jest for all hands to greet the conclusion of this song with the simultaneous cry, "My word," thus winging the arrow of ridicule with a feather from the singer's wing. But he had his revenge with Home Sweet Home and Where is My Wandering Boy Tonight? Ditties into which he threw the most intolerable pathos. It appeared he had no home, nor had ever had one, nor yet any vestige of a family, except a truculent uncle, a baker in Newcastle NSW. His domestic sentiment was therefore wholly in the air and expressed an unrealized ideal. Or perhaps, of all his experiences, this of the currency lass, with its kindly, playful, and tolerant society, approached it the most nearly. It is perhaps because I know the sequel, but I can never think upon this voyage without a profound sense of pity and mystery, of the ship once the whim of a rich blackguard faring with her battered fineries, and upon her homely errand across the plains of ocean, and past the gorgeous scenery of dawn and sunset, and the ship's company, so strangely assembled, so Britishly chuckle-headed, filling their days with chaff in place of conversation, no human book on board, with them except Haddon's buckle, and not a creature fit either to read or to understand it, and the one mark of any civilized interest being when Carthew filled in his spare hours with the pencil and the brush, the whole unconscious crew of them posting in the meanwhile toward so tragic a disaster. 28 days out of Sydney, on Christmas Eve, they fetched up to the entrance of the lagoon and plied all that night outside, keeping their position by the lights of fishers on the reef and the outlines of the palms against the cloudy sky. With the break of day, the schooner was hove to, and the signal for a pilot shown. But it was plain her lights must have been observed in the darkness by the native fishermen, and word carried to the settlement, for a boat was already under way. She came towards them across the lagoon under a great press of sail, lying dangerously down, so that at times in the heavier puffs they thought she would turn turtle, covered the distance in fine style, luffed up smartly alongside, and emitted a haggard-looking white man in pajamas. "Good mornin', Captain," said he, when he had made good his entrance. "I was taking you for a Fiji man-of-war, what with your flush decks and them spars. Well, gentlemen all, here's wishing you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year," he added, and lurched against a stay. "Why, you're never the pilot?" exclaimed Wicks, studying him with a profound disfavor. "You've never taken the ship in Don't Tell Me." "Well, I should guess I have," returned the pilot. "I'm Captain Dobbs, I am, and when I take charge, the captain of that ship can go below and shave. But, man alive—" "You're drunk, man," cried the captain. "Drunk," repeated Dobbs. "You can't have seen much life if you call me drunk. I'm only just beginning. Come night, I won't say. I guess I'll be properly full by then, but now I'm the soberest man in all Big Muggin." "It won't do," retorted Wicks. "Not for Joseph, sir. I can't have you piling up my schooner." "All right," said Dobbs. "Lay and rot where you are, or take and go in and pile her up for yourself like the captain of the Leslie. That's business, I guess. Grudged me $20 pilotage, and lost 20,000 in trade and a brand new schooner. Ripped the keel right off of her, and she went down in the inside of 4 minutes, and lies in 20 fathom, trade and all." "What's all this?" cried Wicks. "Trade? What vessel was this Leslie, anyhow?" "Consigned to Cohen and Combe from Frisco," returned the pilot, "and badly wanted. There's a bark inside filling up for Hamburg. You see her spars over there. And there's 2 more ships due, all the way from Germany, 1 in 2 months, they say, and 1 in 3. Cohen and Co's agent, that's Mr. Topeliusha's taken, and lain down with the jaundice on the strength of it. I guess most people would in his shoes. No trade, no copra, and 2,000 ton of shipping due. If you've any copra on board, Captain, here's your chance. Topelius will buy gold down and give 3 cents. It's all found money to him, the way it is, whatever he pays for it, and that's what come of going back on the pilot. Excuse me one moment, Captain Dobbs. I wish to speak with my mate, said the captain, whose face had begun to shine and his eyes to sparkle. Please yourself, replied the pilot. You couldn't think of offering a man a nip, could you, just to brace him up? This kind of thing looks damned inhospitable and gives a schooner a bad name. I'll talk about that after the anchor's down, returned Wicks, and he drew Carthew forward. I say, he whispered, here's a fortune. How much do you call that? Asked Carthew. I can't put a figure on it yet. I daren't, said the captain. We might cruise 20 years and not find the match of it. And suppose another ship came in tonight. Everything's possible, and the difficulty is this, Dobbs. He's as drunk as a Marine. How can we trust him? We ain't insured worse luck. Suppose you took him aloft and got him to point out the channel, suggested Carthew. If he tallied it all with the chart and didn't fall out of the rigging, perhaps we might risk it. Well, all's risk here, returned the captain. Take the wheel yourself and stand by. Mind, if there's 2 orders, follow mine, not his. Set the coop for'ard with the headsails and the 2 others at the main sheet, and see they don't sit on it. With that he called the pilot. They swarmed aloft in the fore rigging, and presently after there was bawled down the welcome order to ease sheets and fill away. At 9:15 on Christmas morning the anchor was let go. The first cruise of the Currency Lass had thus ended in a stroke of fortune almost beyond hope. She had brought £2,000 worth of trade straight as a homing pigeon to the place where it was most required. And Captain Wicks, or rather Captain Kirkup, showed himself the man to make the best of his advantage. For hard upon 2 days he walked the veranda with the Peleus. For hard upon 2 days his partners watched from the neighboring public house the field of battle. And the lamps were not yet lighted on the evening of the 2nd before the enemy surrendered. Wicks came across to the Sans Souci, as the saloon was called, his face nigh black, his eyes almost closed, and all bloodshot, and yet bright as lighted matches. "Come out here, boys," he said, and when they were some way off among the palms, "I hold 24, he added in a voice scarcely recognizable, and doubtless referring to the venerable game of cribbage. "What do you mean?" asked Tommy. "I've sold the trade," answered Wicks, "or rather, I've sold only some of it, for I've kept back all the mess beef and half the flour and biscuit, and, by God, we're still provisioned for 4 months. By God, it's as good as stolen." "My word!" cried Hempstead. "But what have you sold it for?" gasped Carthew, the captain's almost insane excitement shaking his nerve. "Let me tell it my own way," cried Wicks, loosening his neck. "Let me get at it gradual, or I'll explode. I've not only sold it, boys, I've wrung out a charter on my own terms to Frisco and back. On my own terms. I made a point of it. I fooled him first by making believe I wanted copra, which of course I knew he wouldn't. Hereof couldn't, in fact, and whenever he showed fight, I trotted out the copra, and that man dived. I would take nothing but copra, you see, and so I've got the blooming lot in specie, all but 2 short bills on fresco, and the sum? Well, this whole adventure, including £2,000 of credit, cost us 2,700 and some odd. That's all paid back. In 30 days' cruise we've paid for the schooner and the trade. Heard ever any man the match of that? And it's not all. For besides that," said the captain, hammering his words, We've got 1,300 of profit to divide. I bled him in 4. Thou! He cried in a voice that broke like a schoolboy's. For a moment the partners looked upon their chief with stupefaction, incredulous surprise. Their only feeling. Tommy was the first to grasp the consequences. "Here," he said in a hard business tone, "come back to that saloon. I got to." "Get drunk. You must please excuse me, boys," said the captain earnestly. "I daren't taste nothing. If I was to drink one glass of beer, it's my belief I'd have the apoplexy. The last scrimmage and the blooming triumph pretty nigh hand done me." "Well then, 3 cheers for the captain," proposed Tommy. But Wicks held up a shaking hand. "Not that either, boys," he pleaded. "Think of the other buffer and let him down easy. If I'm like this, just fancy what Topelius is. If he heard us singing out, he'd have the staggers." As a matter of fact, Topelius accepted his defeat with a good grace, but the crew of the wrecked Leslie, who were in the same employment and loyal to their firm, took the thing more bitterly. Rough words and ugly looks were common. Once even they hooted Captain Wicks from the saloon veranda, the currency lasses. Drew out on the other side. For some minutes there had like to have been a battle in Bataratari, and though the occasion passed off without blows, it left on either side an increase of ill feeling. No such small matter could affect the happiness of the successful traders. 5 days more the ship lay in the lagoon, with little employment for anyone but Tommy and the captain, for Topelius's natives discharged cargo and brought ballast. The time passed like a pleasant dream. The adventurers sat up half the night debating and praising their good fortune, or strayed by day in the narrow isle, gaping like Cockney tourists. And on the 1st of the new year the Currency Lass weighed anchor for the second time and set sail for Frisco, attended by the same font where fleet aid. She crossed the doldrums with but small delay, on a wind and in ballast of broken coral. She outdid expectations, and, what added to the happiness of the ship's company, the small amount of work that fell on them to do was now lessened by the presence of another hand. This was the boatswain of the Leslie. He had been on bad terms with his own captain, had already spent his wages in the saloons of Duderitari, had wearied of the place, and while all his shipmates coldly refused to set foot on board the Currency Lass, he had offered to work his passage to the coast. He was a North of Ireland man, between Scotch and Irish, rough, loud, humorous and emotional, not without sterling qualities, and an expert and careful sailor. His frame of mind was different indeed from that of his new shipmates. Instead of making an unexpected fortune, he had lost a berth, and he was besides disgusted with the rations and really appalled at the condition of the schooner. A stateroom door had stuck the first day at sea, and Mac, as they called him, laid his strength to it and plucked it from the hinges. "Glory," said he, "this ship's rotten." "I believe you, my boy," said Captain Wicks. The next day the sailor was observed with his nose aloft. "Don't you get looking at these sticks," the captain said, "or you'll have a fit and fall overboard." Mac turned towards the speaker with rather a wild eye. "Why, I see what looks like a patch of dry rot up yonder that I bet I could stick my fist into," said he. "Looks as if a fellow could stick his head into it, don't it?" returned Wicks. "But there's no good prying into things that can't be mended." "I think I was a currency ass to come on board of her," reflected Mac. "Well, I never said she was seaworthy," replied the captain. "I only said she could show her blooming heels to anything afloat. And besides, I don't know that it's dry rot. I kind of sometimes hope it isn't. Here, turn to and heave the log. That'll cheer you up." "Well, there's no denying it. You're a holy captain," said Mac. And from that day on he made but the one reference to the ship's condition, and that was whenever Tommy drew upon his cellar. "Here's to the junk trade," he would say, as he held out his can of sherry. "Why do you always say that?" asked Tommy. "I had an uncle in the business," replied Mac, and launched at once into a yarn, in which an incredible number of the characters were laid out as nice as you would want to see, and the oaths made up about 2/5 of every conversation. Only once he gave them a taste of his violence. He talked of it, indeed, often. "I'm rather a violent man," he would say, not without pride. But this was the only specimen. Of a sudden, he turned on Hempstead in the ship's waist, knocked him. Against the foresail boom, then knocked him under it, and had set him up and knocked him down once more before anyone had drawn a breath. "Here, belay that," roared Wicks, leaping to his feet. "I won't have none of this." Mac turned to the captain with ready civility. "I only want to learn him manners," said he. "He took and called me Irishman." "Did he?" said Wicks. "Oh, that's a different story. What made you do it, you tomfool? You ain't big enough to call any man that." "I didn't call him it," sputtered Hempstead through his blood and tears. "I only mentioned like he was." "Well, let's have no more of it," said Wicks. "But you are Irish, ain't you?" Cardew asked of his new shipmate shortly. "After. I may be," replied Mac, "but I'll allow no Sydney duck to call me so. No," he added with a sudden heated countenance, "nor any Britisher that walks. Why, look here," he went on, "you're a young swell, aren't you? Suppose I called you that? I'll show you, you would say, and turn to, and take it out of me straight. On the 28th of January, when in lat. 27 degrees 20 N, long, 177 degrees W, the wind chopped suddenly into the west, not very strong but puffy and with flaws of rain. The captain, eager for easting, made a fair wind of it and guyed the booms out wing and wing. It was Tommy's trick at the wheel, and as it was within half an hour of the relief, 7:30 in the morning, the captain judged it not worth while to change him. The puffs were heavy but short. There was nothing to be called a squall, no danger to the ship, and scarce more than usual to the doubtful spars. All hands were on deck in their oilskins, expecting breakfast. The galley smoked, the ship smelt of coffee. All were in good humor to be speeding eastward a full 9, when the rotten foresail tore suddenly between two cloths and then split to either hand. It was for all the world as though some archangel with a huge sword had slashed it with the figure of a cross. All hands ran to secure the slatting canvas, and in the sudden uproar and alert, Tommy Hadden lost his head. Many of his days had been passed since then in explaining how the thing happened. Of these explanations it will be sufficient to say that they were all different, and none satisfactory, and the gross fact remains that the main boom jibe carried away the tackle, broke the mainmast some 3 feet above the deck, and whipped it overboard. For near a minute the suspected foremast gallantly resisted, then followed its companion, and by the time the wreck was cleared of the whole beautiful fabric that enabled them to skim the seas, 2 ragged stumps remained. In these vast and solitary waters, to be dismasted is perhaps the worst calamity. That the ship turn turtle and go down, and at least the pang is over. But men chained on a hulk may pass months scanning the empty sea line and counting the steps of death's invisible approach. There is no help but in the boats, and what a help is that! There heaved the Currency Lass, for instance, a wingless lump, and the nearest human coast, that of Kauai in the Sandwiches, lay about 1,000 miles to south and east of her. over the way there, to men contemplating that passage in an open boat, all kinds of misery, and the fear of death and of madness brooded. A serious company sat down to breakfast, but the captain helped his neighbors with a smile. "Now, boys," he said after a pull at the hot coffee, "we're done with this currency lass, and no mistake. One good job. We made her pay while she lasted, and she paid first rate. And if we were to try our hand again, we can try in style." Another good job. We have a fine, stiff, roomy boat, and you know who you have to thank for that. We've got 6 lives to save and a pot of money, and the point is, where are we to take 'em? It's all 2,000 miles to the nearest of the sandwiches, I fancy, observed Mac. No, not so bad as that, returned the captain. But it's bad enough, rather better in 1,000. I know a man who once did 1,200 in a boat, said Mac, and he had all he wanted. He fetched ashore in the Marquesas and never set a foot on anything floating from that day to this. He said he would rather put a pistol to his head and knock his brains out. "Aye, aye," said Wicks. "Well, I remember a boat's crew that made this very island of Kauai, and from just about where we lie, or a bit further, when they got up with the land, they were clean crazy. It was an iron-bound coast and an old Bob Ridley of a surf on. The natives hailed them from fishing boats and sung out, it couldn't be done at the money. Much they cared. There was the land, there was all they knew, and they turned to and drove the boat slap ashore in the thick of it, and was all drowned but one. No, bull trips are my eye, concluded the captain gloomily. The tone was surprising in a man of his indomitable temper. "Come, Captain," said Carthew, "you have something else up your sleeve. Out with it." "It's a fact," admitted Wicks. "You see there's a raft of little bally reefs about here, kind of chicken pox on the chart. Well, I looked 'em all up, and there's one Midway or Brooks they call it, not 40 mile from our assigned position that I got news of. It turns out it's a coaling station of the Pacific Mail." He said simply. "Well, and I know it ain't no such a thing," said Mac. "I've been quartermaster in that line myself." "All right," returned Wicks. "There's the book. Read what Hoyt says. Read it aloud and let the others hear." Hoyt's falsehood, as readers know, was explicit. Incredulity was impossible, and the news itself delightful beyond hope. Each saw, in his mind's eye, the boat draw into a trim island with a wharf, coal sheds, gardens, the stars and stripes, and the white cottage of the keeper. Saw themselves idle a few weeks in tolerable quarters, and then step on board the China mail, romantic waifs, and yet with pockets full of money, calling for champagne and waited on by troops of stewards. Breakfast, that had begun so dully, ended amid sober jubilation, and all hands turned immediately to prepare the boat. Now that all spars were gone, it was no easy job to get her launched. Some of the necessary cargo was first stowed on board, the specie in particular being packed in a strong chest and secured with lashings to the afterthwart in case of a capsize. Then a piece of the bulwark was raised to the level of the deck, and the boat swung thwartship, made fast with a slack line to either stump, and successfully run out. For a voyage of 40 miles to hospitable quarters, not much food or water was required, but they took both in superfluity. Amalu and Mac, both ingrained sailormen, had chests which were the headquarters of their lives. 2 more chests with handbags, oilskins, and blankets supplied the others. Adden, amid general applause, added the last case of the brown sherry. The captain brought the log, instruments, and chronometer. Nor did Hempstead forget the banjo or a pinned handkerchief of Buderi Tari shells. It was about 3 p.m. when they pushed off, and the wind being still westerly fell to the oars. "Well, we've got the guts out of you," was the captain's. Nodded farewell to the hulk of the Currency Lass, which presently shrank and faded in the sea. A little after a calm succeeded, with much rain, and the first meal was eaten, and the watch below lay down to their uneasy slumber on the bilge under a roaring shower bath. The 29th dawned overhead from out of ragged clouds. There is no moment when a boat at sea appears so trenchantly black and so conspicuously little, and the crew looked about them at the sky and water with a thrill of loneliness and fear. With sunrise the trade set in, lusty and true to the point. Sail was made, the boat flew, and by about 4 in the afternoon they were well up with the closed part of the reef, and the captain, standing on the thwart and holding by the mast, was studying the island through the binoculars. "Well, and where's you station?" cried Mac. "I don't some way pick it up," replied the captain. "No, nor never will," retorted Mac with a clang of despair and triumph in his tones. The truth was soon plain to all. No buoys, no beacons, no lights, no coal, no station. The castaways pulled through a lagoon and landed on an isle, where was no mark of man but wreckwood, and no sound but of the sea. For the seafowl that harbored and lived there at the epoch of my visit were then scattered into the uttermost parts of the ocean, and had left no traces of their sojourn besides dropped feathers and addled eggs. It was to this they had been sent. For this they had stooped all night over the dripping oars, hourly moving further from relief. The boat, for as small as it was yet eloquent of the hands of men. A thing alone indeed upon the sea, but yet in itself all human, and the isle, for which they had exchanged it, was ingloriously savage, a place of distress, solitude, and hunger unrelieved. There was a strong glare and shadow of the evening over all, in which they sat or lay, not speaking, careless even to eat, men swindled out of. Life and riches by a lying book. In the great good nature of the whole party, no word of reproach had been addressed to Haddon, the author of these disasters. But the new blow was less magnanimously borne, and many angry glances rested on the captain. Yet it was himself who roused them from their lethargy. Grudgingly they obeyed, drew the boat beyond tide mark, and followed him to the top of the miserable islet, whence a view was commanded of the whole wheel of the horizon, then part darkened under the coming night, part dyed with the hues of the sunset, and populous with the sunset, and populous with the sunset clouds. Here the camp was pitched, and a tent run up with the oars, sails, and mast. And here Amalu, at no man's bidding, from the mere instinct of habitual service, built the fire and cooked a meal. Night was come, and the stars and the silver sickle of new moon beamed overhead before the meal was ready. The cold sea shone about them, and the fire glowed in their faces as they ate. Tommy had opened his case, and the brown sherry went. The round, but it was long before they came to conversation. "Well, is it to be Kauai after all?" asked Max suddenly. "This is bad enough for me," said Tommy. "Let's stick it out where we are." "Well, I can tell ye one thing," said Mac, "if you care to hear it. When I was in the China mail, we once made this island. It's in the course from Honolulu." "Deuce it is," cried Carthew. "That settles it then. Let's stay. We must keep good fires going, and there's plenty wreck, lashings of wreck," said the Irishman. "There's nothing here but wreck and coffin boards." "But we'll have to make a proper blaze," objected Hempstead. "You can't see a fire like this, not any why, I mean." "Can't you?" said Carthew. "Look round." They did, and saw the hollow of the night, the bare, bright face of the sea, and the stars regarding them, and the voices died in their bosoms at the spectacle. In that huge isolation, it seemed they must be visible from China on the one hand and California on the other. "My God, it's dreary," whispered Hempstead. "Dreary," cried Mac, and fell suddenly silent. "It's better than a boat anyway," said Hatton. "I've had my belly full of boat." "What kills me is that specie," the captain broke out. "Think of all that riches. 4,000 in gold, bad silver and short bills, all found money too, and no more use than that much dung." "I'll tell you one thing," said Tommy. "I don't like it being in the boat. I don't care to have it so far away." "Why, who's to take it?" cried Mac with a guffaw of evil laughter. But this was not at all the feeling of the partners, who rose, clambered down the aisle, brought back the inestimable treasure chest, slung upon 2 oars, and set it conspicuous in the shining of the fire. "There's my beauty," cried Wicks, viewing it with a cocked head. "That's better than a bonfire." "What?" "We have a chest here, and bills for close upon £2,000. There's no show to that. It would go in your vest pocket, but the rest, upwards of £40 avoirdupois of coined gold, and close on 200 weight of Chile silver. What, ain't that good enough to fetch a fleet? Do you mean to say that won't affect a ship's compass? Do you mean to tell me that the lookout won't turn to and sell mellid?" he cried. Mac, who had no part nor lot in the bills, the £40 of gold or the 200 weight of silver, heard this with impatience, and fell into a bitter, choking laughter. "You'll see," he said harshly. "You'll be glad to feed them bills into the fire before you're through with yet." And he turned, passed by himself out of the ring of the firelight, and stood gazing seaward. His speech and his departure extinguished instantly those sparks of better humor kindled by the dinner and the chest. The group fell again to an ill-favored silence, and Hempstead began to touch the banjo, as was his habit of an evening. His repertory was small. The chords of Home Sweet Home fell under his fingers, and when he had played the symphony, he instinctively raised up his voice. "Be it never so humble, there's no place like 'ome," he sang. The last word was still upon his lips when the instrument was snatched from him and dashed into the fire, and he turned with a cry to look into the furious countenance of Mac. "I'll be damned if I stand this," cried the captain, leaping up belligerent. "I told ye I was a violent man," said Mac with a movement of deprecation very surprising in one of his character. "Why don't he give me a chance then? Haven't we enough to bear the way we are?" And to the wonder and dismay of all, the man choked upon a sob. "It's ashamed of myself I am," he said presently, his Irish accent 20-fold increased. "I ask all your pardons for me wiolence, and especially the little man's, who is a harmless creature, and here's me hand to 'im, if he'll condescend to take me by tate." So this scene of barbarity and sentimentalism passed off, leaving behind strained and incongruous impressions. True, everyone was perhaps glad when silence succeeded that all too appropriate music. True, Mac's apology and subsequent behavior rather raised him in the opinion of his fellow castaways. But the discordant note had been struck, and its harmonics tingled in the brain. In that savage, houseless isle, the passions of man had sounded, if only for the moment, and all men trembled at the possibilities of horror. It was determined to stand watch and watch in case of passing vessels, and Tommy, on fire with an idea, volunteered to stand first. The rest crawled under the tent, and were soon enjoying that comfortable gift of sleep which comes everywhere and to all men, quenching anxieties and speeding time. And no sooner were all settled, No sooner had the drone of many snorers begun to mingle with and overcome the surf than Tommy stole from his post with the case of sherry and dropped it in a quiet cove in a fathom of water. But the stormy inconstancy of Mac's behavior had no connection with a gill or two of wine. His passions, angry and otherwise, were on a different sail plan from his neighbors, and there were possibilities of good and evil in that hybrid Celt beyond their prophecy. About 2 in the morning, the starry sky, or so it seemed, for the drowsy watchman had not observed the approach of any cloud, brimmed over in a deluge, and for 3 days it rained without remission. The islet was a sponge, the castaway sops, the view all gone, even the reef concealed behind the curtain of the falling water. The fire was soon drowned out. After a couple of boxes of matches had been scratched in vain, it was decided to wait for better weather, and the party lived in wretchedness on raw tins and a ration of hard bread. By the 2nd February, in the dark hours of the morning watch, the clouds were all blown by, the sun rose glorious, and once more the castaways sat by a quick fire and drank hot coffee with the greed of brutes and sufferers. Thenceforward their affairs moved in a routine. A fire was constantly maintained, and this occupied one hand continuously, and the others for an hour or so in the day. Twice a day, all hands bathed in the lagoon, their chief, almost their only pleasure. Often they fished in the lagoon with good success, and the rest was passed in lolling, strolling, yarns, and disputation. The time of the China steamers was calculated to a nicety, which done, the thought was rejected and ignored. It was one that would not bear consideration. The boat voyage having been tacitly set aside, the desperate part chosen to wait there for the coming of help or of starvation, no man had courage left to look his bargain in the face, far less to discuss it with his neighbors. But the unuttered terror haunted them. In every hour of idleness, at every moment of silence, it returned and breathed a chill about the circle and carried men's eyes to the horizon. Then, in a panic of self-defense, they would rally to some other subject, and, in that lone spot, what else was to be found to speak of but the treasure? That was indeed the chief singularity, the one thing conspicuous in their island life. The presence of that chest of bills and specie dominated the mind like a cathedral, and there were besides connected with it certain irking problems well fitted to occupy the idle. £2,000 were due to the Sydney firm. £2,000 were clear profit, and fell to be divided in varying proportions among 6. It had been agreed how the partners were to range. Every pound of capital subscribed, every pound that fell due in wages, was to count for 1 lei. Of these, Tommy could claim 510, Cartu 17, Wicks 140, and Hemstead and Amalu 10 apiece, 840 leis in all. What was the value of a lei? This was at first debated in the air and chiefly by the strength of Tommy's lungs. Then followed a series of incorrect calculations, from which they issued, arithmetically foiled, but agreed from weariness upon an approximate value of £2, 7 shillings, 7 and 1/4 pence. The figures were admittedly incorrect. The sum of the shares came not to £2,000, but to £1996, 6 shillings, 3 pounds, 14 shillings being thus left unclaimed. But it was the nearest they had yet found, and the highest as well, so that the partners were made the less critical by the contemplation of their splendid dividends. Wicks put in £100, and stood to draw captain's wages for 2 months. His taking was £333, 30 shillings 612 pence. Cartu had put in £150. He was to take out £401, 18 shillings, 6 and 50 pence. Tommy's £500 had grown to be 12 quint, 13 pounds, 12 shillings, 9 3/4 pence, and Amalu and Hemstead, ranking for wages only, had £22, 16 shillings, 1 and 2 pence each. From talking and brooding on these figures, It was but a step to opening the chest. And once the chest open, the glamour of the cash was irresistible. Each felt that he must see his treasure separate with the eye of flesh, handle it in the hard coin, mark it for his own, and stand forth to himself, the approved owner. And here an insurmountable difficulty barred the way. There were some 17 shillings in English silver, the rest was Chile, and the Chile dollar, which had been taken at the rate of 6 to the pound sterling, was practically their smallest coin. It was decided, therefore, to divide the pounds only, and to throw the shillings, pence, and fractions in a common fund. This, with the £3. 14 already in the heel, made a total of £7, 1 shilling. "I'll tell you," said Wicks. "Let Carthew and Tommy and me take £1 apiece, and Hemstead and Amalu split the other 4, and toss up for the odd bob." "Oh, rot," said Carthew. "Tommy and I are bursting already. We can take half a sov each, and let the other 3 have 40 shillings. "I'll tell you now, it's not worth splitting," broke in Mac. "I've cards in my chest. Why don't you play for the slump sum?" In that idle place, the proposal was accepted with delight. Mac, as the owner of the cards, was given a stake. The sum was played for in 5 games of cribbage, and when Amalu, the last survivor in the tournament, was beaten by Mac, it was found the dinner hour was past. After a hasty meal, they fell again immediately. To cards this time on Carthew's proposal to Van John. It was then probably 2 p.m. of the 9th February, and they played with varying chances for 12 hours, slept heavily, and rose late on the morrow to resume the game. All day of the 10th, with grudging intervals for food, and with one long absence on the part of Tommy from which he returned, dripping with the case of sherry, they continued to deal and stake. Night fell. They drew the closer to the fire. It was maybe 2 in the morning, and Tommy was selling his deal by auction, as usual with that timid player, when Carthew, who didn't intend to bid, had a moment of leisure and looked round him. He beheld the moonlight on the sea, the money piled and scattered in that incongruous place, the perturbed faces of the players. He felt in his own breast the familiar tumult, and it seemed as if there rose in his ears a sound of music, and the moon seemed still to shine upon a sea, but the sea was changed, and the casino towered from among lant gardens, and the money clinked on the green board. "Good God," he thought, "am I gambling?" Again, he looked the more curiously about the sandy table. He and Mac had played and won like gamblers. The mingled gold and silver lay by their places in the heap. Amalu and Hemstead had each more than held their own, but Tommy was cruel far to leeward, and the captain was reduced to perhaps £50. "I say, let's knock off," said Carthew. "Give that man a glass of buckle," said someone, and the fresh bottle was opened, and the game went inexorably on. Carthew was himself too heavy a winner to withdraw or to say more, and all the rest of the night he must look on at the progress of this folly, and make gallant attempts to lose with the not uncommon consequence of winning more. The first dawn of the 11th February found him well nigh desperate. It chanced he was then dealer, and still winning. He had just dealt a round of many tens, everyone had staked heavily, the captain had put up all that remained to him, £12 in gold and a few dollars, and Carthew, looking privately at his cards before he showed them, found he held a natural. "See here, you fellows," he broke out, "this is a sickening business, and I'm done with it for one." So saying, he showed his cards, tore them across, and rose from the ground. The company stared and murmured in mere amazement, but Mac stepped gallantly to his support. "We've had enough of it, I do believe," said he. "But of course it was all fun, and here's my counters back. All counters in, boys." and he began to pour his winnings into the chest, which stood fortunately near him. Carthew stepped across and wrung him by the hand. "I'll never forget this," he said. "And what are ye going to do with the highway boy and the plumber?" inquired Mac in a low tone of voice. "They've both wan, ye see." "That's true," said Carthew aloud. "Amalu and Hempstead, count your winnings. Tommy and I pay that." It was carried without speech, the pair glad enough to receive their winnings, it mattered not from whence. And Tommy, who had lost about £500, delighted with the compromise. "And how about Mac?" asked Hempstead. "Is he to lose all?" "I beg your pardon, plumber. I'm sure ye mean well," returned the Irishman, "but you'd better shut your face, for I'm not that kind of a man. If I thought I had won that money fair, there's never a soul here could get it from me. But I thought it was in fun. That was my mistake, ye see, and there's no man big enough upon." "This island to give a present to my mother's son. So there's my opinion to ye, plumber, and you can put it in your pocket till required." "Well, I will say, Mac, you're a gentleman," said Carthew, as he helped him to shovel back his winnings into the treasure chest. "Divil a fear of it, sir." "A drunken sailor man," said Mac. The captain had sat some while with his face in his hands. Now he rose mechanically, shaking and stumbling like a drunkard after a debauch. But as he rose, his face was altered, and his voice rang out over the isle, "Sail ho!" All turned at the cry, and there, in the wild light of the morning, heading straight for Midway Reef, was the brig Flying Scud of Hull. Chapter 24. A Hard Bargain. The ship which thus appeared before the castaways had long tramped the ocean, wandering from one port to another as freights offered. She was 2 years out from London by the Cape of Good Hope, India, and the archipelago, and was now bound for San Francisco in the hope of working homeward round the Horn. Her captain was one Jacob Trent. He had retired some 5 years before to a suburban cottage, a patch of cabbages, a gig, and the conduct of what he called a bank. The name appears to have been misleading. Borrowers were accustomed to choose works of art and utility in the front shop. Loaves of sugar and bolts of broadcloth were deposited in pledge, and it was a part of the manager's duty to dash in his gig on Saturday evenings from one small retailer's to another, and to annex in each the bulk of the week's takings. His was thus an active life, and to a man of the type of a rat, filled with recondite joys. An unexpected loss, a lawsuit, and the unintelligent commentary of the judge upon the bench combined to disgust him of the business. I was so extraordinarily fortunate as to find in an old newspaper a report of the proceedings in l'ILV, the Cardiff Mutual Accommodation Banking Company. I confess I fail entirely to understand the nature of the business, the judge had remarked while Trent was being examined in chief. A little after, on fuller information, "They call it a bank," he had opined, "but it seems to me to be an unlicensed pawn shop," and he wound up with this appalling allocution: "Mr. Bain, Trent, I must put you on your guard. You must be very careful, or we shall see you here again." In the inside of a week, the captain disposed of the bank, the cottage, and the gig and horse, and to sea again in the Flying Scud, where he did well and gave high satisfaction to his owners. But the glory clung to him. He was a plain sailor man, he said, but he could never long allow you to forget that he had been a banker. His mate, Elias Goddedaal, was a huge Viking of a man, 6 feet 3, and of proportionate mass, strong, sober, industrious, musical, and sentimental. He ran continually over into Swedish melodies, chiefly in the minor. He had paid $9 to hear Paddy To hear Nilsson, he had deserted a ship and 2 months' wages, and he was ready at any time to walk 10 miles for a good concert or 7 to a reasonable play. On board, he had 3 treasures: a canary bird, a concertina, and a blinding copy of the works of Shakespeare. He had a gift, peculiarly Scandinavian, of making friends at sight, and elemental innocence commended him. He was without fear, without reproach, and without money or the hope of making it. Holderson was second mate, and berthed aft, but messed usually with the hands. Of one more of the crew, some image lives. This was a foremast hand out of the Clyde, of the name of Brown. A small, dark, thick-set creature with dog's eyes, of a disposition incomparably mild and harmless, he knocked about seas and cities, the uncomplaining whip-top of one vice. "The drink is my trouble, ye see," he said to Karshu shyly, "and it's the more shame to me because I'm come of very good people at bowling down the Wear." The letter that so much affected Nares, in case the reader should remember it, was addressed to this man Brown. Such was the ship that now carried joy into the bosoms of the castaways. After the fatigue and the bestial emotions of their night of play, the approach of salvation shook them from all self-control. Their hands trembled, their eyes shone, they laughed and shouted like children as they cleared their camp. And someone beginning to whistle. Marching through Georgia, the remainder of the packing was conducted, amidst 1,000 interruptions, to these martial strains. But the strong head of Wicks was only partly turned. "Boys," he said, "easy all. We're going aboard of a ship of which we don't know nothing. We've got a chest of specie, and seeing the weight, we can't turn to and deny it. Now suppose she was fishy. Suppose it was some kind of a bully haze. Business. It's my opinion we'd better be on hand with the pistols." Every man of the party but Hempstead had some kind of a revolver. These were accordingly loaded and disposed about the persons of the castaways, and the packing was resumed and finished in the same rapturous spirit as it was begun. The sun was not yet 10 degrees above the eastern sea, but the brig was already close in and hove to, before they had launched the boat and sped, shouting at the oars, towards the passage, shouting at the oars, towards the passage. It was blowing fresh outside, with a strong send of sea. The spray flew in the oarsmen's faces. They saw the Union Jack blow abroad from the flying scud. The men clustered at the rail, the cook in the galley door, the captain on the quarter-deck with a pith helmet and binoculars, and the whole familiar business, the comfort, company, and safety of a ship, heaving nearer at each stroke, maddened them with joy. Wicks was the first to catch the line and swarm on board, helping hands grabbing him as he came and hauling him across the rail. "Captain, sir, I suppose?" he said, turning to the hard old man in the pith helmet. "Captain Trent, sir," returned the old gentleman. "Well, I'm Captain Kirkup, and this is the crew of the Sydney schooner Currency Lass, dismasted at sea January 28th. "Aye, aye," said Trent. "Well, you're all right now." "Lucky for you, I saw your signal. I didn't know I was so near this beastly island. There must be a drift to the southward here, and when I came on deck this morning at 8 bells, I thought it was a ship afire." It had been agreed that, while Wicks was to board the ship and do the civil, rest were to remain in the whaleboat and see the treasure safe. A tackle was passed down to them. To this they made fast the invaluable chest and gave the word to heave. But the unexpected weight brought the hand at the tackle to a stand. 2 others ran to tail on and help him, and the thing caught the eye of Trent. "Vast heaving!" he cried sharply. And then to Wicks, "What's that? I don't ever remember to have seen a chest weigh like that." "It's money," said Wicks. "It's what?" cried Trent. "Specie," said Wicks, "saved from the wreck." Trent looked at him sharply. "Here, let go that chest again, Mr. Goddedaal," he commanded. "Shove the boat off, and stream her with a line astern." Aye, sir, from Goddardale. What the devil's wrong? Asked Wicks. Nothing, I dare say, returned Trent. But you'll allow it's a queer thing when a boat turns up in mid-ocean with half a ton of specie and everybody armed, he added, pointing to Wicks's pocket. Your boat will lay comfortably astern while you come below and make yourself satisfactory. Oh, if that's all, said Wicks. My log and papers are as right as the mail. Nothing fishy about us. And he hailed his friends in the boat, bidding them have patience, and turned to follow Captain Trent. This way, Captain Kirkup, said the latter, and don't blame a man for too much caution. No offense intended. And these China rivers shake a fellow's nerve. All I want is just to see you're what you say you are. It's only my duty, sir, and what you would do yourself in the circumstances. I've not always been a ship captain. I was a banker once, and I tell you, that's the trade to learn caution in. You have to keep your weather eye lifting Saturday nights. And with a dry, businesslike cordiality, he produced a bottle of gin. The captains pledged each other. The papers were overhauled. The tale of Topelius and the trade was told in appreciative ears and cemented their acquaintance. Trent's suspicions, thus finally disposed of, were succeeded by a fit of profound thought, during which he sat lethargic and stern, looking at and drumming on the table. "Anything more?" asked Wicks. "What sort of a place is it inside?" inquired Trent, sudden as the Wicks had touched a spring. "It's a good enough lagoon, a few horses' heads, but nothing to mention," answered Wicks. "I've a good mind to go in," said Trent. "I was new-rigged in China. It's given very bad, and I'm getting frightened for my sticks. We could set it up as good as new in a day. For I dare say your lot would turn to and give us a hand. You see if we don't," said Wicks. "So be it then," concluded Trent. "A stitch in time saves nine." They returned on deck. Wicks cried the news to the Currency Lasses. The foretopsail was filled again, and the brig ran into the lagoon, lively, the whaleboat dancing in her wake, and came to single anchor off Middlebrooks Island before 8. She was boarded by the castaways. Breakfast was served, the baggage slung on board and piled in the waist, and all hands turned to upon the rigging. All day the work continued, the two crews rivaling each other in expense of strength. Dinner was served on deck, the officers messing aft under the slack of the spanker, the men fraternizing forward. Trent appeared in excellent spirits, served out grog to all hands, opened the bottle of Cape wine for the after table, and obliged his guests with many details of the life of a financier in Cardiff. He had been 40 years at sea, had 5 times suffered shipwreck, was once 9 months the prisoner of a pepper raja, and had seen service under fire in Chinese rivers, but the only thing he cared to talk of, the only thing of which he was vain, or with which he thought it possible to interest a stranger, was his career as a money-lender in the slums of a seaport town. The afternoon spell told cruelly on the Currency Lasses. Already exhausted as they were with sleeplessness and excitement, they did the last hours of this violent employment on bare nerves, and when Trent was at last satisfied with the condition of his rigging, expected eagerly the word to put to sea. But the captain seemed in no hurry. He went and walked by himself softly, like a man in thought. Presently he hailed Wicks. "You're a kind of company, ain't you, Captain Kirkup?" he inquired. "Yes, we're all on board on lays," was the reply. "Well then, you won't mind if I ask the lot of you down to tea in the cabin?" asked Trent. Wicks was amazed, but he naturally ventured no remark, and a little after the 6 Currency Lasses sat down with Trent and Goddardale to a spread of marmalade, butter, toast, sardines, tin tongue, and steaming tea. The food was not very good, and I have no doubt Nares would have reviled it, but it was manna to the castaways. Goddardale waited on them with a kindness far before courtesy, a kindness like that of some old honest countrywoman in her farm. It was remembered afterwards that Trent took little share in these attentions, but sat much absorbed in thought, and seemed to remember and forget the presence of his guests alternately. Presently he addressed the Chinaman. "Clear out," said he, and watched him till he had disappeared in the stair. "Now, gentlemen," he went on, "I understand you're a joint stock sort of crew, and that's why I've had you all down, for there's a point I want made clear. You see what sort of a ship this is. A good ship, though I say it, and you see what the rations are good enough for sailormen." There was a hurried murmur of approval, but curiosity for what was coming next prevented an articulate reply. "Well," continued Trent, making bread pills and looking hard at the middle of the table, "I'm glad, of course, to be able to give you a passage to Frisco. One sailor man should help another, that's my motto. But when you want a thing in this world, you generally always have to pay for it." He laughed a brief, joyless laugh. "I have no idea of losing by my kindness." "We have no idea you should, Captain," said Wicks. "We are ready to pay anything in reason," added Carthew. At the words, Goddedaal, who sat next to him, touched him with his elbow, and the two mates exchanged a significant look. The character of Captain Trent was given and taken in that silent second. "In reason?" repeated the captain of the brig. "I was waiting for that. Reason's between two people, and there's only one here. I'm the judge, I'm reason. If you want an advance, you have to pay for it," he hastily corrected himself. "If want a passage in my ship, you have to pay my price," he substituted. "That's business, I believe. I don't want you. You want me." "Well, sir," said Carthew, "and what is your price?" The captain made bread pills. "If I were like you," he said, "when you got hold of that merchant and the Gilberts, I might surprise you." "You had your chance then. Seems to me it's mine now." "Turnabout's fair play. What kind of mercy did you have on that Gilbert merchant?" he cried with a sudden stridency. "Not that I blame you. All's fair in love and business." And he laughed again, a little frosty giggle. "Well, sir?" said Carthew gravely. "Well, this ship's mine, I think?" he asked sharply. "Well, I'm of that way of thinking meself," observed Mac. "I say it's mine, sir," reiterated Trent, like a man trying to be angry. "And I tell you all, if I was a driver like what you are, I would take the lot. But there's £2,000 there that don't belong to you, and I'm an honest man. Give me the 2,000 that's yours, and I'll give you a passage to the coast, and land every man jack of you in Frisco with £15 in his pocket, and the captain here with 25. Goddedal laid down his head on the table like a man ashamed. "You're joking," said Wicks, purple in the face. "Am I?" said Trent. "Please yourselves. You're under no compulsion. This ship's mine, but there's that Brooks Island don't belong to me, and you can lay there till you die for what I care." "It's more than your blooming brig's worth," cried Wicks. "It's my price anyway," returned Trent. "And do you mean to say you would land us there to starve?" cried Tommy. Captain Trent laughed the third time. "Starve? I defy you to," said he. "I'll sell you all the provisions you want at a fair profit." "I beg your pardon, sir," said Mac, "but my case is by itself. I'm working me passage. I got no share in that 2,000 pounds, nor nothing in my pocket. And I'll be glad to know what you have to say to me." "I ain't a hard man," said Trent. "That shall make no difference. I'll take you with the rest, only of course you get no 15 pound." The impudence was so extreme and startling that all breathed deep, and Godedale raised up his face and looked his superior sternly in the eye. But Mac was more articulate. "And you're what ye call a British seaman, I suppose, the sorrow in your guts," he cried. "One more such word, and I clap you in irons," said Trent, rising gleefully at the face of opposition. "And where would I be the while you were doing you't?" asked Mac. "After you and your rigging too. You old puggy, ye haven't the civility of a bug, and I'll learn ye some." His voice did not even rise as he uttered the threat. No man present, Trent least of all, expected that which followed. The Irishman's hand rose suddenly from below the table, an open-clasped knife balanced on the palm. There was a movement swift as conjuring. Trent started half to his feet, turning a little as he rose so as to escape the table. And the movement was his bane. The missile struck him in the jugular. He fell forward, and his blood flowed among the dishes on the cloth. The suddenness of the attack and the catastrophe, the instant change from peace to war and from life to death, held all men spellbound. Yet a moment they sat about the table, staring open-mouthed upon the prostrate captain and the flowing blood. The next, Godedale had leaped to his feet, caught up the stool on which he had been sitting, and swung it high in air, a man transfigured, roaring as he stood so that men's ears were stunned with it. There was no thought of battle in the Currency Lasses. None drew his weapon. All huddled helplessly from before the face of the Bearsark Scandinavian. His first blow sent Mac to ground with a broken arm. His second bashed out the brains of Hempstead. He turned from one to another, menacing and trumpeting like a wounded elephant, exulting in his rage. But there was no counsel, no light of reason in that ecstasy of battle, and he shied from the pursuit of victory to hail fresh blows upon the supine Hempstead, so that the stool was shattered and the cabin rang with their violence. The sight of that post-mortem cruelty recalled. Cartu to the life of instinct, and his revolver was in hand, and he had aimed and fired before he knew. The ear-bursting sound of the report was accompanied by a yell of pain. The colossus paused, swayed, tottered, and fell headlong on the body of his victim. In the instant silence that succeeded, the sound of feet pounding on the deck and in the companion leaped into hearing, and a face, that of the sailor Holderson, appeared below the bulkheads in the cabin doorway. Carthew shattered it with a second shot, for he was a marksman. "Pistols!" he cried, and charged at the companion, Wicks at his heels, Tommy and Amalu following. They trod the body of Holderson underfoot, and flew upstairs and forth into the dusky blaze of a sunset red as blood. The numbers were still equal, but the flying scuds dreamed not of defense, and fled with one accord for the forecastle scuttle. Bram was first in flight. He disappeared below. Unscathed, the Chinaman followed head foremost with a ball in his side, and the others shinned into the rigging. A fierce composure settled upon Wicks and Carthew, their fighting second wind. They posted Tommy at the fore and Amalu at the main to guard the masts and shrouds, and going themselves into the waist, poured out a box of cartridges on deck and filled the chambers. The poor devils aloft bleated aloud for mercy. But the hour of any mercy was gone by. The cup was brewed and must be drunken to the dregs. Since so many had fallen, all must fall. The light was bad, the cheap revolvers fouled and carried wild. The screaming wretches were swift to flatten themselves against the masts and yards, or find a momentary refuge in the hanging sails. The fell business took long. but it was done at last. Hardy the lunder was shot on the fore-royal yard and hung horribly suspended in the brails. Wallen, the other, had his jaw broken on the main topgallant crosstrees and exposed himself, shrieking, till a second shot dropped him on the deck. This had been bad enough, but worse remained behind. There was still Brown in the forepeak. Tommy, with a sudden clamor of weeping, begged for his life. "One man can't hurt us," he sobbed. "We can't go on with this. I spoke to him at dinner. He's an awful decent little cad. It can't be done. Nobody can go into that place and murder him. It's too damned wicked." The sound of his supplications was perhaps audible to the unfortunate below. "One left, and we all hang," said Wicks. "Brown must go the same road." The big man was deadly white, and trembled like an aspen, and he had no sooner finished speaking than he went to the ship's side and vomited. "We can never do it if we wait," said Carthew. "Now or never," and he marched towards the scuttle. "No, no, no!" wailed Tommy, clutching at his jacket. But Carthew flung him off and stepped down the ladder, his heart rising with disgust and shame. The Chinaman lay on the floor, still groaning. The place was pitch dark. "Brown!" cried Carthew. "Brown, where are you?" His heart smote him for the treacherous apostrophe, but no answer came. He groped in the bunks. They were all empty. Then he moved towards the forepeak, which was hampered with coils of rope and spare chandlery in general. "Brown," he said again. "Here, sir," answered a shaking voice, and the poor invisible caitiff called on him by name and poured forth out of the darkness an endless, garrulous appeal for mercy. A sense of danger, of daring, had alone nerved Carthew to enter the forecastle, and here was the enemy crying and pleading like a frightened child. His obsequious "Here, sir," his horrid fluency of obtestation, made the murder tenfold more revolting. Twice Carthew raised the pistol. Once he pressed the trigger, or thought he did, with all his might, but no explosion followed, and with that the lees of his courage ran quite out, and he turned and fled from before his victim. Wicks sat on the forehatch, raised the face of a man of 70, and looked a wordless question. Carthew shook his head, with such composure as a man displays marching towards the gallows. Wicks arose, walked to the scuttle, and went down. Brown thought it was Carthew returning, and discovered himself, half crawling from his shelter, with another incoherent burst of pleading. Wicks emptied his revolver at the voice, which broke into mouse-like whimperings and groans. Silence succeeded, and the murderer ran on deck like one possessed. The other three were now all gathered on the forehatch, and Wicks took his place beside them without question, asked or answered. They sat close, like children in the dark, and shook each other with their shaking. The dusk continued to fall, and there was no sound but the beating of the surf and the occasional hiccup of a sob from Tommy Haddon. "God, if there was another ship!" cried Carthew of a sudden. Wicks started and looked aloft with the trick of all seamen, and shuddered as he saw the hanging figure on the royal yard. "If I went aloft, I'd fall," he said simply. "I'm done up." It was Amalu who volunteered, climbed to the very truck, swept the fading horizon, and announced nothing within sight. "No odds," said Wicks. "We can't sleep." "Sleep," echoed Carthew, and it seemed as if the whole of Shakespeare's Macbeth thundered at the gallop through his mind. "Well then, we can't sit and chitter here," said Wicks, "till we've cleaned ship, and I can't turn to till I've had gin, and the gin's in the cabin, and who's to fetch it?" "I will," said Carthew, "if anyone has matches." Amalu passed him a box, and he went aft and down the companion and into the cabin, stumbling upon bodies. Then he struck a match, and his looks fell upon two living eyes. "Well," asked Mac, for it was he who still survived in that shambles of a cabin. "It's done. They're all dead," answered Carthew. "Christ," said the Irishman, and fainted. The gin was found in the dead captain's cabin. It was brought on deck, and all hands had a drum, and attacked their farther task. The night was come. The moon would not be up for hours. A lamp was set on the main hatch to light Amalu as he washed down decks, and the galley lantern was taken to guide the others in their graveyard business. Holderson, Hempstead, Trent, and Goodadale were first disposed of, the last still breathing as he went over the side. Wallen followed, and then Wicks, steadied by the gin, went aloft with a boat-hook, and succeeded in dislodging Hardy. The Chinaman was their last task. He seemed to be light-headed, talked aloud in his unknown language as they brought him up, and it was only with the splash of his sinking body that the gibberish ceased. Brown, by common consent, was left alone. Flesh and blood could go no further. All this time they had been drinking undiluted gin like water, 3 bottles. Stood broached in different quarters, and none passed without a gulp. Tommy collapsed against the mainmast. Wicks fell on his face on the poop ladder and moved no more. Amalu had vanished unobserved. Carthew was the last afoot. He stood swaying at the break of the poop, and the lantern, which he still carried, swung with his movement. His head hummed. It swarmed with broken thoughts. Memory of that day's abominations flared up and died down within him like the light of a lamp in a strong draught. And then he had a drunkard's inspiration. There must be no more of this, he thought, and stumbled once more below. The absence of Holderson's body brought him to a stand. He stood and stared at the empty floor, and then remembered and smiled. From the captain's room he took the open case with 1 dozen and 3 bottles of gin, put the lantern inside, and walked precariously forth. Mac was once more conscious, his eyes haggard, his face drawn with pain and flushed with fever. And Carthew. Remembered he had never been seen to, had lain there helpless, and was so to lie all night, injured, perhaps dying. But it was now too late. Reason had now fled from that silent ship. If Carthew could get on deck again, it was as much as he could hope, and casting on the unfortunate a glance of pity, the tragic drunkard shouldered his way up the companion, dropped the case overboard, and fell in the scuppers helpless. Chapter 25. A Bad Bargain. With the first color in the east, Carthew awoke and sat up. A while he gazed at the scroll of the morning bank, and the spars and hanging canvas of the brig, like a man who wakes in a strange bed, with a child's simplicity of wonder. He wondered above all what ailed him, what he had lost, what disfavor had been done him, which he knew he should resent, yet had forgotten. And then, like a river bursting through a dam, the truth rolled on him, its instantaneous volume. His memory teemed with speech and pictures that he should never again forget, and he sprang to his feet, stood a moment hand to brow, and began to walk violently to and fro by the companion. As he walked, he wrung his hands. "God, God," he kept saying, with no thought of prayer, uttering a mere voice of agony. The time may have been long or short. It was perhaps minutes, perhaps only seconds, ere he awoke to find himself observed, and saw the captain sitting up and watching him over the break of the poop, a strange blindness as of fever in. His eyes, a haggard knot of corrugations on his brow, Cain saw himself in a mirror. For a flash, they looked upon each other, and then glanced guiltily aside, and Carthew fled from the eye of his accomplice and stood leaning on the taffrail. An hour went by, while the day came brighter and the sun rose and drank up the clouds, an hour of silence in the ship, an hour of agony beyond narration for the sufferers. Brown's gabbling prayers, the cries of the sailors in the rigging, strains of the dead Hempstead's minstrelsy ran together in Carthew's mind, with sickening iteration. He neither acquitted nor condemned himself. He did not think. He suffered. In the bright water into which he stared, the pictures changed and were repeated. The bare sark rage of Godedale, the blood-red light of the sunset into which they had run forth, the face of the babbling Chinaman as they cast him over, the face of the babbling Chinaman as they cast him over, the face of the captain, seen a moment since as he awoke from drunkenness into remorse. And time passed, and the sun swam higher, and his torment was not abated. Then were fulfilled many sayings, and the weakest of these condemned brought relief and healing to the others. Amalu the drudge awoke like the rest to sickness of body and distress of mind, but the habit of obedience ruled in that simple spirit, and appalled to be so late, he went direct into the galley, kindled the fire, and began to get breakfast. At the rattle of dishes, the snapping of the fire, and the thin smoke that went up straight into the air, the spell was lifted. The condemned felt once more the good dry land of habit underfoot. They touched again the familiar guide ropes of sanity. They were restored to a sense of the blessed revolution and return of all things earthly. The captain drew a bucket of water and began to bathe. Tommy sat up, watched him a while, and slowly followed his example. And Carthew, remembering his last thoughts of the night before, hastened to the cabin. Mac was awake, perhaps had not slept. Over his head, Godedal's canary twittered shrilly from its cage. "How are you?" asked Carthew. "Me a room's broke," returned Mac. "But I can stand that. It's this place I can't abide. I was coming on deck anyway." "Stay where you are, though," said Carthew. "It's deadly hot above, and there's no wind. I'll wash out this," and he paused, seeking a word and not finding one for the grisly foulness of the cabin. "Faith, I'll be obliged to ye then," replied the Irishman. He spoke mild and meek, like a sick child with its mother. There was now no violence in the violent man, and as Carthew fetched a bucket and swab and the steward's sponge and began to cleanse the field of battle, he alternately watched him or shut his eyes. And sighed like a man near fainting. "I have to ask all your pardons," he began again presently, "and the more shame to me as I got ye into trouble and couldn't do nothing when it came. You saved me life, sir. You're a clane shot." "For God's sake, don't talk of it," cried Carthew. "It can't be talked of. You don't know what it was." "It was nothing down here. They fought on deck. Oh, my God!" And Carthew, with the bloody sponge pressed to his face, struggled a moment with hysteria. "Kate cool, Mr. Carthew. It's done now," said Mac, "and ye may bless God you're not in pain and helpless in the bargain." There was no more said by one or other, and the cabin was pretty well cleansed when a stroke on the ship's bell summoned Carthew to breakfast. Tommy had been busy in the meanwhile. He had hauled the whaleboat close aboard, and already lowered into it a small keg of beef that he found ready broached beside. The galley door. It was plain he had but the one idea to escape. "We have a ship full of stores to draw upon," he said. Well, what are we staying for? Let's get off at once for Hawaii. I've begun preparing already. Mac has his arm broken, observed Carthew. How would he stand the voyage? A broken arm, repeated the captain. That all? I'll set it after breakfast. I thought he was dead like the rest. That madman hit out like, and there, at the evocation of the battle, his voice ceased, and the talk died with it. After breakfast, the three white men went down into the cabin. I've come to set your arm, said the captain. I beg your pardon, Captain, replied Mac, but the first thing you got to do is to get this ship to sea. We'll talk of me Aram after that. Oh, there's no such blooming hurry, returned Wicks. When the next ship sails in, you'll tell me stories, retorted Mac. But there's nothing so unlikely in the world, objected Carthew. Don't be deceiving yourself, said Mac. If ye want a ship, divil a one'll look near ye in 6 year. But if ye don't, ye may take my word for yet. We'll have a squadron layin' here. That's what I say, cried Tommy. That's what I call sense. Let's stuck that whaleboat and be off. And what will Captain Wicks be thinking of the whaleboat? Asked the Irishman. I don't think of it at all, said Wicks. We've a smart-looking brig underfoot. That's all the whaleboat I want. Excuse me, cried Tommy. That's childish talk. You've got a brig, to be sure, and what use is she? You daren't go anywhere in her. What port are you to sail for? For the port of Davy Jones's Locker, my son, replied the captain. This brig's going to be lost at sea. I'll tell you where to, and that's about 40 miles to windward of Kauai. We're going to stay by her till she's down, and once the masts are under, she's the Flying Scud no more, and we never heard of such a brig. And it's the crew of the schooner Currency Lass that comes ashore in the boat and takes the first chance to Sydney. Captain dear, that's the first Christian word I've heard of Ute, cried Mac. And now, just let me Aram be, Jewel, and get the brig outside. I'm as anxious as yourself, Mac, returned Wicks. But there's not wind enough to swear by, so let's see your arm and no more talk. The arm was set and splinted, the body of Brown fetched from the forepeak, where it lay still and cold, and committed to the waters of the lagoon, and the washing of the cabin rudely finished. All these were done ere midday, and it was past 3 when the first cat's paw ruffled the lagoon, and the wind came in a dry squall, which presently sobered to a steady breeze. The interval was passed by all in feverish impatience, and by one of the party in secret and extreme concern of mind. Captain Wicks was a fore and aft sailor. He could take a schooner through a Scotch reel, felt her mouth and divined her temper like a rider with a horse. She, on her side, recognizing her master, and following his wishes like a dog. But by a not very unusual train of circumstance, the man's dexterity was partial and circumscribed. On a schooner's deck he was Rembrandt, or at the least Mr. Whistler. On board a brig he was Pierre Grasso. Again and again in the course of the morning he had reasoned out his policy and rehearsed his orders, and ever with the same depression and wariness. It was guesswork. It was chance. The ship might behave as he expected, and might not. Suppose she failed him, he stood there helpless, beggared of all the proved resources of experience. Had not all hands been so weary, had he not feared to communicate his own misgivings, he could have towed her out. But these reasons sufficed, and the most he could do was to take all possible precautions. Accordingly he had Carthew aft, explained what was to be done with anxious patience, and visited along with him the various sheets and braces. "I hope I'll remember," said Carthew. "It seems awfully muddled. It's the rottenest kind of rig," the captain admitted, "all blooming pocket handkerchiefs. And not one sailor man on deck. Ah, if she'd only been brigantine now. But it's lucky the passage is so plain, there's no maneuvering to mention. We get under way before the wind, and run right so till we begin to get foul of the island. Then we haul our wind, and lie as near southeast as may be till we're on that line, 'bout ship there, and stand straight out on the port tack. Catch the idea? Yes, I see the idea, replied Carthew rather dismally, and the two incompetents studied for a long time in silence the complicated gear above their heads. But the time came when these rehearsals must be put in practice. The sails were lowered, and all hands heaved the anchor short. The whaleboat was then cut adrift, the upper topsails and the spanker set, the yards braced up, and the spanker sheet hauled out to starboard. Heave away on your anchor, Mr. Carthew. Anchor's gone, sir. Set jibs. It was done, and the brig still hung enchanted. Wicks, his head full of a schooner's mainsail, turned his mind to the spanker. First he hauled in the sheet, and then he hauled it out, with no result. "Brail the damn thing up," he bawled at last, with a red face. "There ain't no sense in it." It was the last stroke of bewilderment for the poor captain, that he had no sooner brailed up the spanker than the vessel came before the wind. The laws of nature seemed to him to be suspended. He was like a man in a world of pantomime tricks. The cause of any result and the probable result of any action equally concealed from him. He was the more careful not to shake the nerve of his amateur assistants. He stood there with a face like a torch, but he gave his orders with aplomb, and indeed, now the ship was under way, supposed his difficulties over. The lower topsails and courses were then set, and the brig began to walk the water like a thing of life, her forefoot discoursing music, the birds flying and crying over her spars. Bit by bit the passage began to open and the blue sea to show between the flanking breakers on the reef. Bit by bit, on the starboard bow, the low land of the islet began to heave closer aboard. The yards were braced up, the spanker sheet hauled aft again. The brig was close hauled, laid down to her work like a thing in earnest, and had soon drawn near to the point of advantage, where she might stay and lie out of the lagoon in a single tack. Wicks took the wheel himself, swelling with success. He kept the brig full to give her heels, and began to bark his orders, "Ready about, helms a lee, tacks." And sheets, mainsail haul. And then the fatal words, "That'll do your mainsail, jump for'ard and haul round your foreyards." To stay a square-rigged ship is an affair of knowledge and swift sight, and a man used to the succinct evolutions of a schooner will always tend to be too hasty with a brig. It was so now. The order came too soon. The topsails set flat aback, the ship was in irons. Even yet, had the helm been reversed, they might have saved her. But to think of a stern board at all, far more to think of profiting by one, were foreign to the schooner sailor's mind. Wicks made haste instead to wear ship, a maneuver for which room was wanting, and the Flying Scud took ground on a bank of sand and coral about 20 minutes before 5. Wicks was no hand with a square rigger, and he had shown it. But he was a sailor and a born captain of men for all homely purposes, where intellect is not required, and an eye in a man's head and a heart under his jacket will suffice. Before the others had time to understand the misfortune, he was bawling fresh orders, and had the sails clewed up, and took soundings round the ship. "She lies lovely," he remarked, and ordered out a boat with the starboard anchor. "Here, steady," cried Tommy. "You ain't going to turn us to warp her off." "I am, though," replied Wicks. "I won't set a hand to such tomfoolery for one," replied Tommy. "I'm dead beat." He went and sat down doggedly on the main hatch. "You got us on. Get us off again," he added. Carthew and Wicks turned to each other. "Perhaps you don't know how tired we are?" said Carthew. "The tide's flowing," cried the captain. "You wouldn't have me miss a rising tide?" "Oh, gammon, there's tides tomorrow," retorted Tommy. "And I'll tell you what," added Carthew, "the breeze is failing fast, and the sun will soon be down. We may get into all kinds of fresh mess in the dark and with nothing but light airs." "I don't deny it," answered Wicks, and stood a while as if in thought. "But what I can't make out," he began again, with agitation, "what I can't make out is what you're made of. To stay in this place is beyond me. There's the bloody sun going down, and to stay here is beyond me." The others looked upon him with horrified surprise. This fall of their chief pillar, this irrational passion in the practical man, suddenly barred out of his true sphere. The sphere of action shocked and daunted them, but it gave to another and unseen hearer the chance for which he had been waiting. Mac, on the striking of the brig, had crawled up the companion, and he now showed himself and spoke up. "Captain Wicks," said he, "it's me that brought this trouble on the lot of ye. I'm sorry for yet. I ask all your pardons, and if there's anyone can say, 'I forgive ye,' it'll make my soul the lighter." Wicks stared upon the man in amaze. Then his self-control returned to him. "We're all in glass houses here," he said. "We ain't going to turn to and throw stones. I forgive you, sure enough, and much good may it do you." The other spoke to the same purpose. "I thank ye for ut, and 'tis done like gentlemen," said Mac. "But there's another thing I have upon my mind. I hope we're all Protestants here?" It appeared they were. It seemed a small thing for the Protestant religion to rejoice in. "Well, that's as it should be," continued Mac. "And why shouldn't we say the Lord's Prayer? There can't be no hurtin' yet." He had the same quiet, pleading, childlike way with him as in the morning, and the others accepted his proposal and knelt down without a word. "Kneel if you like," said he. "I'll stand," and he covered his eyes. So the prayer was said to the accompaniment of the surf and sea-birds, and all rose refreshed and felt lightened of a load. Up to then they had cherished their guilty memories in private, or only referred to them in the heat of a moment, and fallen immediately silent. Now they had faced their remorse in company, and worse seemed over. Nor was it only that, but the petition, "Forgive us our trespasses," falling in so apposite after they had themselves forgiven the immediate author of their miseries, sounded like an absolution. Tea was taken on deck in the time of the sunset, and not long after the 5 castaways once more lay down to sleep. Day dawned windless and hot. Their slumbers had been too profound to be refreshing, and they woke listless, and sat up and stared about them with dull eyes. Only Wicks, smelling a hard day's work ahead, was more alert. He went first to the well, sounded it once and then a second time, and stood a while with a grim look, so that all could see he was dissatisfied. Then he shook himself, stripped to the buff, clambered on the rail, drew himself up, and raised his arms to plunge. The dive was never taken. He stood instead transfixed, his eyes on the horizon. "Hand up that glass," he said. In a trice they were all swarming aloft, the nude captain leading with the glass. On the northern horizon was a finger of gray smoke, straight in the windless air like a point of admiration. "What do you make it?" they asked of Wicks. "She's trucked down," he replied. "No telling yet. By the way the smoke builds, she must be heading right here. What can she be?" "She might be a China mail," returned Wicks, "and she might be a blooming man of war come to look for castaways. Here, this ain't the time to stand staring. On deck, boys!" He was the first on deck, as he had been the first aloft, handed down the ensign. Bent it again to the signal halyards, and ran it up Union down. "Now hear me," he said, jumping into his trousers, "and everything I say you grip onto. If that's a man of war, she'll be in a tearing hurry. All these ships are what don't do nothing and have their expenses paid. That's our chance, for we'll go with them, and they won't take the time to look twice or to ask a question. I'm Captain Trent. Carthew, you're Goddadallo. Tommy, you're Hardy. Max Brown, Amalu hold hard. We can't make a Chinaman of him. Ah, we must have deserted. Amalu stowed away, and I turned him to as cook, and was never at the bother to sign him. Catch the idea? Say your names." And that pale company recited their lesson earnestly. "What were the names of the other two?" he asked. "Him Carthew shot in the companion, and the one I caught in the jaw on the main top gallant." "Holderson and Wallen," said someone. "Well, they're drowned," continued Wicks. "Drowned alongside trying to lower a boat. We had a bit of a squall last night. That's how we got ashore." He ran and squinted at the compass. "Squall out of nor'west half west. Blew hard. Everyone in a mess. Falls jammed, and Holderson and Wallen spilt overboard. See, clear your blooming heads." He was in his jacket now, and spoke with the feverish impatience and contention that rang like anger. "But is it safe?" asked Tommy. "Safe," bellowed the captain. "We're standing on the drop, you moon calf. If that ship's bound for China, which she don't look to be, we're lost as soon as we arrive. If she's bound the other way, she comes from China, don't she? Well, if there's a man on board of her that ever clapped eyes on Trent or any blooming hand out of the sprig, we'll all be in irons in 2 hours. Safe? No, it ain't safe. It's a Beckerly last chance to shave the gallows, and that's what it is. At this convincing picture, fear took hold on all. "Hadn't we 100 times better stay by the brig?" cried Carthew. "They would give us a hand to float her off." "You'll make me waste this holy day in chattering," cried Wicks. "Look here, when I sounded the well this morning, there was 2 foot of water there against 8 inches last night." "What's wrong?" "I don't know. Might be nothing. Might be the worst kind of smash. And then, there we are and for 1,000 miles, in an open boat, if that's your taste." "But it may be nothing, and anyway their carpenters are bound to help us repair her," argued Carthew. "Moses Murphy!" cried the captain. "How did she strike? Bows on, I believe." "And she's down by the head now. If any carpenter comes tinkering here, where'll he go first? Down in the forepeak, I suppose. And then, how about all that blood among the chandlery? You would think you were a lot of members of Parliament discussing Plimsoll, and you're just a pack of murderers with the halter round your neck. Any other ass got any time to waste? No? Thank God for that. Now, all hands. I'm going below, and I leave you here on deck. You get the boat cover off that boat, then you turn to and open the spacey chest. There are 5 of us. Get 5 chests, and divide the specie equal among the 5, put it at the bottom, and go at it like tigers. Get blankets, or canvas, or clothes, so it won't rattle. It'll make 5 pretty heavy chests, but we can't help that. You, Carthew dash me, you, Mr. Goddedaal, come below. We've our share before us." And he cast another glance at the smoke and hurried below with Carthew at his heels. The logs were found in the main cabin behind the canary's cage. 2 of them, one kept by Trent, one by Dale. Wicks looked first at one, then at the other, and his lips stuck out. "Can you forge hand of right?" he asked. "No," said Carthew. "There's luck for you, no more can I," cried the captain. "Hullo, here's worse yet. Here's the Dale up to date. He must have filled it in before supper. See for yourself, smoke observed." Captain Kirkup and 5 hands of the schooner Currency Lass. "Ah, this is better," he added, turning to the other log. "The old man ain't written anything for a clear fortnight. We'll dispose of your log altogether, Mr. Gooderdale, and stick to the old man's to mine, I mean, only I ain't going to write it up for reasons of my own." "You are! You're going to sit down right here and fill it in the way I tell you." "How to explain the loss of mine?" asked Carthew. "You never kept one," replied the captain. "Gross neglect of duty, you'll catch it." "And the change of writing?" resumed Carthew. "You began. Why do you stop and why do I come in? And you'll have to sign anyway." "Oh, I've met with an accident and can't write," replied Wicks. "An accident?" repeated Carthew. "It don't sound natural. What kind of an accident?" Wicks spread his face up on the table and drove a knife through his palm. "That kind of an accident," said he. "There's a way to draw to windward of most difficulties if you've a head on your shoulders." He began to bind up his hand with a handkerchief, glancing the while over Godedale's log. "Hello," he said. "This'll never do for us. This is an impossible kind of a yarn. Here, to begin with, is this Captain Trent trying some fancy course, leastways he's 1,000 miles to south'ard of the Great Circle. And here, it seems, he was close up with this island on the 6th, sails all these days, and is close up with it again, by daylight on the 11th. Goddedaal said they had the deuce's luck," said Carthew. "Well, it don't look like real life, that's all I can say," returned Wicks. "It's the way it was, though," argued Carthew. "So it is. And what the better are we for that if it don't look so?" cried the captain, sounding unwonted depths of art criticism. "Here, try and see if you can't tie this bandage. I'm bleeding like a pig." As Carthew sought to adjust the handkerchief, his patient seemed sunk in a deep muse, his eye veiled, his mouth partly open. The job was yet scarce done when he sprang to his feet. "I have it!" he broke out and ran on deck. "Here, boys," he cried. "We didn't come here on the 11th. We came in here on the evening of the 6th and lay here ever since becalmed. As soon as you've done with these chests," he added, "you can turn to and roll out beef and water breakers. It'll look more shipshape, like as if we were getting ready for the boat voyage." And he was back again in a moment, cooking the new log. Goodedale's was then carefully destroyed, and a hunt began for the ship's papers. Of all the agonies of that breathless morning, this was perhaps the most poignant. Here and there the 2 men searched, cursing, cannoning together, streaming with heat, freezing with terror. News was bawled down to them that the ship was indeed a man of war, that she was close up, that she was lowering a boat, and still they sought in vain. By what accident they missed the iron box with the money and accounts is hard to fancy, but they did. And the vital documents were found at last in the pocket of Trent's shore-going coat, where he had left them when last he came on board. Wicks smiled for the first time that morning. "None too soon," said he. "And now for it. Take these others for me. I'm afraid I'll get them mixed if I keep both." "What are they?" Carthew asked. "They're the Kirkup and Currency Lass papers," he replied. "Pray God we need 'em again." boats inside the lagoon, sir," hailed down Mac, who sat by the skylight doing. Sentry while the others worked. "Time we were on deck then, Mr. Godedale," said Wicks. As they turned to leave the cabin, the canary burst into piercing song. "My God!" cried Carthew, with a gulp. "We can't leave that wretched bird to starve. It was poor Godedale's." "Bring the bally thing along," cried the captain, and they went on deck. An ugly brute of a modern man-of-war lay just without the reef, now quite inert, now giving a flap or two with her propeller. Nearer hand, and just within, a big white boat came skimming to the stroke of many oars, her ensign blowing at the stern. "One word more," said Wicks after he had taken in the scene. "Mac, you've been in China ports? All right, then you can speak for yourself. The rest of you I kept on board all the time we were in Hong Kong, hoping you would desert. But you fooled me and stuck to the brig. That'll make your lying come easier." The boat was now close at hand. A boy in the stern sheets was the only officer, and a poor one plainly, for the men were talking as they pulled. "Thank God, they've only sent a kind of a middy," ejaculated Wicks. "Here, you Hardy, stand for'ard. I'll have no deck hands on my quarter deck," he cried. And the reproof braced the whole crew like a cold douche. The boat came alongside with perfect neatness, and the boy officer stepped on board, where he was respectfully greeted by Wicks. "You the master of this ship?" he asked. "Yes, sir," said Wicks. "Trent is my name, and this is the Flying Scud of Hull." "You seem to have got into a mess," said the officer. "If you'll step aft with me here, I'll tell you all there is of it," said Wicks. "Why, man, you're shaking!" cried the officer. "So would you, perhaps, if you had been in the same berth," returned Wicks. And he told the whole story of the rotten water, the long calm, the squall, the seamen drowned, glibly and hotly, talking with his head in the lion's mouth like one pleading in the dock. I heard the same tale from the same narrator in the saloon in San Francisco, and even then his bearing filled me with suspicion, but the officer was no observer. "Well, the captain is in no end of a hurry," said he, "but I was instructed to give you all the assistance in my power, and signal back for another boat if more." Hands were necessary. "What can I do for you?" "Oh, we won't keep you no time," replied Wicks cheerily. "We're all ready, bless you men's chests, chronometer, papers and all." "Do you mean to leave her?" cried the officer. "She seems to me to lie nicely. Can't we get your ship off?" "So we could, and no mistake, but how we're to keep her afloat's another question." "Her bows is stove in," replied Wicks. The officer colored to the eyes. He was incompetent and knew he was, thought he was already detected, and feared to expose himself again. There was nothing further from his mind than that the captain should deceive him. If the captain was pleased, why so was he. "All right," he said. "Tell your men to get their chests aboard." "Mr. Godedale, turn the hands to get the chests aboard," said Wicks. The 4 Currency Lasses had waited the while on tenterhooks. This welcome news broke upon them like the sun at midnight, and Haddon burst into a storm of tears, sobbing aloud as he heaved upon the tackle. But the work went none the less briskly forward. Chests, men, and bundles were got over the side with alacrity. The boat was shoved off. It moved out of the long shadow of the Flying Scud, and its bows were pointed at the passage. So much, then, was accomplished. The shipwreck had passed muster. They were clear of her, they were safe away, and the water widened between them and her damning evidences. On the other hand, they were drawing nearer to the ship of war, which might very well prove to be their prison, and a hangman's cart, to bear them to the gallows, of which they had not yet learned either whence she came or whither she was bound, and the doubt weighed upon their heart like mountains. It was Wicks who did the talking. The sound was small in Carthew's ears, like the voices of men miles away, but the meaning of each word struck home to him like a bullet. "What did you say your ship was?" inquired Wicks. "Tempest, don't you know?" returned the officer. "Don't you know? What could that mean? Perhaps nothing, perhaps that the ships had met already." Wicks took his courage in both hands. "Where is she bound?" he asked. "Oh, we're just looking in at all these miserable islands here," said the officer. "Then we bear up for San Francisco." "Oh yes, you're from China ways, like us," pursued Wicks. "Hong Kong," said the officer and spat over the side. "Hong Kong." Then the game was up. As soon as they set foot on board, they would be seized. The wreck would be examined, the blood found, the lagoon perhaps dredged, and the bodies of the dead would reappear to testify. An impulse almost incontrollable bade Carthew rise from the thwart, shriek out aloud, and leap overboard. It seemed so vain a thing to dissemble longer, to dally with the inevitable, to spin out some 100 seconds more of agonized suspense, with shame and death thus visibly approaching. But the indomitable Wicks persevered. His face was like a skull, his voice scarce recognizable. The dullest of men and officers, it seemed, must have remarked that telltale countenance and broken utterance. And still he persevered, bent upon certitude. "Nice place, Hong Kong," he said. "I'm sure I don't know," said the officer. "Only a day and a half there, called for." "Orders and came straight on here. Never heard of such a beastly cruise." And he went on describing and lamenting the untoward fortunes of the Tempest. But Wicks and Carthew heeded him no longer. They lay back on the gunwale, breathing deep, sunk in a stupor of the body, the mind within still nimbly and agreeably at work, measuring the past danger, exulting in the present relief, numbering with ecstasy their ultimate chances of escape. For the voyage in the man-of-war they were now safe. Yet a few more days of peril, activity, and presence of mind in San Francisco, and the whole horrid tale was blotted out, and Wicks again became Kirkup, and Godedale became Carthuman, beyond all shot of possible suspicion. Men who had never heard of the Flying Scud, who had never been in sight of Midway Reef. So they came alongside, under many craning heads of seamen and projecting mouths of guns. So they climbed on board somnambulous and looked blindly. About them at the tall spars, the white decks, and the crowding ship's company, and heard men as from far away, and answered them at random. And then a hand fell softly on Carthew's shoulder. "Why, Norrie, old chappie, where have you dropped from? All the world's been looking for you. Don't you know you've come into your kingdom?" He turned, beheld the face of his old schoolmate Seabright, and fell unconscious at his feet. The doctor was attending him a while later in Lieutenant Seabright's cabin when he came to himself. He opened his eyes, looked hard in the strange face, and spoke with a kind of solemn vigor. "Brown must go the same road," he said, "now or never," and then paused, and his reason coming to him with more clearness spoke again. "What was I saying?" "Where am I? Who are you?" "I am the doctor of the Tempest," was the reply. "You are in Lieutenant Seabright's berth, and you may dismiss all concern from your mind. Your troubles are over, Mr. Carthew." "Why do you call me that?" he asked. I remember Seabright knew me. Oh, and he groaned and shook. Send down Wicks to me. I must see Wicks at once, he cried, and seized the doctor's wrists with unconscious violence. All right, said the doctor, let's make a bargain. You swallow down this draught, and I'll go and fetch Wicks. And he gave the wretched man an opiate that laid him out within 10 minutes, and in all likelihood preserved his reason. It was the doctor's next business to attend to Mac, and he found occasion, while engaged upon his arm to make the man repeat the names of the rescued crew. It was now the turn of the captain, and there is no doubt he was no longer the man that we have seen. Sudden relief, the sense of perfect safety, a square meal, and a good glass of grog had all combined to relax his vigilance and depress his energy. When was this done? Asked the doctor, looking at the wound. More than a week ago, replied Wicks, thinking singly of his log. Hey! Cried the doctor, and he raised his hand and looked the captain in the eyes. I don't remember exactly, faltered Wicks. And at this remarkable falsehood, the suspicions of the doctor were at once quadrupled. By the way, which of you is called Wicks? He asked easily. What's that? Snapped the captain, falling white as paper. Wicks, repeated the doctor. Which of you is he? That's surely a plain question. Wicks stared upon his questioner in silence. Which is Brown, then? Pursued the doctor. What are you talking of? What do you mean by this? Cried Wicks, snatching his half-bandaged hand away so that the blood sprinkled in the surgeon's face. He did not trouble to remove it. Looking straight at his victim, he pursued his questions. Why must Brown go the same way? He asked. Wicks fell trembling on a locker. Carthew's told you, he cried. No, replied the doctor, he has not, but he and you between you had set me thinking, and I think there's something wrong. Give me some grog, said Wicks. I'd rather tell than have you find out. I'm damned if it's half as bad as what anyone would think. And with the help of a couple of strong grogs, the tragedy of the Flying Scud was told for the first time. It was the fortunate series of accidents that brought the story to the doctor. He understood and pitied the position of these wretched men and came wholeheartedly to their assistance. He and Wicks and Carthew, so soon as he was recovered, held 100 councils and prepared a policy for San Francisco. It was he who certified Goodall unfit to be moved and smuggled Carthew ashore under cloud of night. It was he who kept Wicks's wound open that he might sign with his left hand. He who took all their Chile silver and in the course of the first day got it converted for them into portable gold. He used his influence in the wardroom to keep the tongues of the young officers in order so that Carthew's identification was kept out of the papers. And he rendered another service yet more important. He had a friend in San Francisco, a millionaire. To this man he privately presented Carthew as a young gentleman come newly into a huge estate, but troubled with Jew debts which he was trying to settle on the quiet. The millionaire came readily to help, and it was with his money that the wrecker gang was to be fought. What was his name? Out of 1,000 guesses? It was Douglas Longhurst. As long as the currency lasses could all disappear under fresh names, it did not greatly matter if the brig were bought or any small discrepancies should be discovered in the wrecking. The identification of one of their number had changed all that. The smallest scandal must now direct attention to the movements of Norris. It would be asked how he, who had sailed in a schooner, from Sydney, had turned up so shortly after in a brig out of Hong Kong. And from one question to another, all his original shipmates were pretty sure to be involved. Hence arose naturally the idea of preventing danger, profiting by Carthew's newfound wealth, and buying the brig under an alias, and it was put in hand with equal energy and caution. Carthew took lodgings alone under a false name, picked up Bellairs at random, and commissioned him to buy the wreck. "What figure, if you please?" the lawyer asked. "I want it bought," replied Carthew. "I don't mind about the price." "Any price is no price," said Bellairs. "Put a name upon it. Call it £10,000 then, if you like," said Carthew. In the meanwhile, the captain had to walk the streets, appear in the consulate, be cross-examined by Lloyd's agent, be badgered about his lost accounts, sign papers with his left hand, and repeat his lies to every skipper in San Francisco, not knowing at what moment he might run into the arms of some old friend who should hail him by the name of Wicks, or some new enemy who should be in a position to deny him that of Trent. And the latter incident did actually befall him, but was transformed by his stout countenance into an element of strength. It was in the consulate of all untoward places that he suddenly heard a big voice inquiring for Captain Trent. He turned with a customary sinking at his heart. "You ain't Captain Trent," said the stranger, falling back. "Why, what's all this?" "They tell me you're passing off as Captain Trent." "Captain Jacob Trent, a man I knew since I was that high." "Oh, you're thinking of my uncle as had the bank in Cardiff," replied Wicks with desperate aplomb. "I declare I never knew he had a nevy," said the stranger. "Well, you see he has," says Wicks. "And how is the old man?" asked the other. "Fit as a fiddle," answered Wicks, and was opportunely summoned by the clerk. This alert was the only one until the morning of the sale, when he was once more alarmed by his interview with Jim, and it was with some anxiety that he attended the sale, knowing only that Carthew was to be represented, but neither who was to represent him, nor what were the instructions given. I suppose Captain Wicks is a good life. In spite of his personal appearance and his own known uneasiness, I suppose he is secure from apoplexy, or it must have struck him there and then as he looked on at the stages of that insane sale and saw the old brig and her not very valuable cargo knocked down at last to a total stranger. For £10,000. It had been agreed that he was to avoid Carthew, and above all Carthew's lodging, so that no connection might be traced between the crew and the pseudonymous purchaser. But the hour for caution was gone by, and he caught a tram and made all speed to Mission Street. Carthew met him in the door. Come away from here," said Carthew, and when they were clear of the house, "All's up," he added. "Oh, you've heard of the sale, then?" said Wicks. "The sale!" cried Carthew. "I declare I've forgotten it," and he told of the voice in the telephone, and the maddening question, "Why did you want to buy the Flying Scud?" This circumstance, coming on the back of the monstrous improbabilities of the sale, was enough to have shaken the reason of Immanuel Kant. The earth seemed banded together to defeat them. The stones and the boys on the street appeared to be in possession of their guilty secret. Flight was their one thought. The treasure of the currency lass they packed in waistbelts, expressed their chests to an imaginary address in British Columbia, and left San Francisco the same afternoon, booked for Los Angeles. The next day they pursued their retreat by the Southern Pacific route, which Carthew followed on his way to England, but the other three branched off for Mexico. Epilogue to Will H. Will. Dear Lore, the other day at Manahiki, of all places, I had the pleasure to meet Dodd. We sat some 2 hours in the neat little toy-like church, set with pews after the manner of Europe, and inlaid with mother of pearl in the style, I suppose, of the New Jerusalem. The natives, who are decidedly the most attractive inhabitants of this planet, crowded round us in the pew, and fawned upon and patted us, and here it was. I put my questions, and Dodd answered me. I first carried him back to the night in Barbizon, when Carthew told his story, and asked him what was done about Bellairs. It seemed he had put the matter to his friend at once, and that Carthew took it with an inimitable lightness. "He's poor, and I'm rich," he had said. "I can afford to smile at him. I go somewhere else, that's all, somewhere that's far away and dear to get to. Persia would be found to answer, I fancy. No end of a place, Persia. Why not come with me?" And they had left the next afternoon for Constantinople, on their way to Teheran. Of the Schuster, it is only known by a newspaper paragraph that he returned somehow to San Francisco and died in the hospital. "Now there's another point," said I. "There you are off to Persia with a millionaire, and rich yourself. How come you here in the South Seas, running a trader?" he said with a smile, that I had not yet heard of Jim's last bankruptcy. "I was about cleaned out once more," he said, "and then it was that Carthew had this schooner built and put me in as supercargo. It's his yacht, and it's my trader, and as nearly all the expenses go to the yacht, I do pretty well. As for Jim, he's right again, one of the best businesses, they say, in the West, fruit, cereals, and real estate, and he has a Tartar of a partner now, Nares no less. Nares will keep him straight. Nares has a big head. They have their country places next door at Sausalito, and I stayed with them time about the last time I was on the coast. Jim had a paper of his own. I think he has a notion of being senator one of these days, and he wanted me to throw up the schooner and come and write his editorials. He holds strong views on the state constitution, and so does Mamie." "And what became of the other 3 currency lasses after they left Carthew?" I inquired. "Well, it seems they had a huge spree in the city of Mexico," said Dodd. "And then Haddon and the Irishman took a turn at the goldfields in Venezuela, and Wicks went on alone to Valparaiso. There's a Kirk up in the Chilean Navy to this day. I saw the name in the papers about the Balmaceda War. Haddon soon wearied of the mines, and I met him the other day in Sydney. The last news he had from Venezuela, Mac had been knocked over in an attack on the gold train, so there's only the 3 of them left, for Amalu scarcely counts. He lives on his own land in Maui, at the side of Hale Akala, where he keeps Godadel's canary, and they say he sticks to his dollars, which is a wonder in a Kanaka. He had a considerable pile to start with, for not only Hempstead's share, but Carthew's was divided equally among the other 4, Mac being counted. What did that make for him altogether? I could not help asking, for I had been diverted by the number of calculations in his narrative. £128, 19 shillings, and 11 pence halfpenny, he replied with composure. That's leaving out what little he won at Van John. It's something for a Kanaka, you know. And about that time we were at last obliged to yield to the solicitations of our native admirers, and go to the pastor's house to drink green coconuts. The ship I was in was sailing the same night, for Dodd had been beforehand and got all the shell in the island, and though he pressed me to desert and return with him to Auckland, whither he was now bound to pick up Carthew, I was firm in my refusal. The truth is, since I have been mixed up with Havens and Dodd in the design to publish the latter's narrative, I seem to feel no want for Carthew's society. Of course I am wholly modern in sentiment, and think nothing more noble than to publish people's private affairs at so much a line. They like it, and if they don't, they ought to. But a still small voice keeps telling me they will not like it always, and perhaps not always stand it. Memory besides supplies me with the face of a pressman in the sacred phrase who proved altogether too modern for one of his neighbors, and qui nuncit per idea tenebricosum, as it were, marshalling us our way. I am in no haste to nos praerchens, be that man's successor. Carthew has a record as a clane shot, and for some years Samoa will be good enough for me. We agreed to separate accordingly, but he took me on board in his own boat with the hardwood fittings, and entertained me on the way with an account of his late visit to Batari Tari, whither he had gone on an errand for Carthew to see how Topelius was getting along, and, if necessary, to give him a helping hand. But Topelius was in great force, and had patronized and well outmaneuvered him. Carthew will be pleased, said Dodd, for there's no doubt they oppressed the man abominably when they were in the currency last. It's diamond cut diamond now. This, I think, was the most of the news I got from my friend Loudon, and I hope I was well inspired and have put all the questions to which you would be curious to hear an answer. But there is one more that I dare say you are burning to put to myself, and that is, what your own name is doing in this place, cropping up, as it were, uncalled for on the stern of our poor ship. If you were not born in Arcadia, you linger in fancy on its margin. Your thoughts are busied with the flutes of antiquity, with daffodils, and the classic poplar, and the footsteps of the nymphs, and the elegant and moving aridity of ancient art. Why dedicate to you a tale of a cast so modern, full of details of our barbaric manners and unstable morals, full of the need and the lust of money, so that there is scarce a page in which the dollars do not jingle, full of the unrest and movement of our century, so that the reader is hurried from place to place and sea to sea, and the book is less a romance than a panorama in the end, as blood bespattered as an epic? Well, you are a man interested in all problems of art, even the most vulgar, and it may amuse you to hear the genesis and growth of the wrecker. On board the schooner Equator, almost within sight of the Johnstone Islands, if anybody knows where these are, and on a moonlit night, when it was a joy to be alive, the authors were amused with several stories of the sale of wrecks. The subject tempted them, and they sat apart in the alleyway to discuss its possibilities. What a tangle it would make, suggested one, if the wrong crew were aboard. But how to get the wrong crew there? I have it, cried the other, the so-and-so affair. For not so many months before, and not so many 100 miles from where we were then sailing, a proposition almost tantamount to that of Captain Trent had been made by a British skipper to some British castaways. Before we turned in, the scaffolding of the tale had been put together, but the question of treatment was as usual more obscure. We had long been at once attracted and repelled by that very modern form of the police novel or mystery story, which consists in beginning your yarn anywhere but at the beginning, and finishing it anywhere but at the end, attracted by its peculiar interest when done, and the peculiar difficulties that attend its execution, repelled by that appearance of insincerity and shallowness of tone, which seems its inevitable drawback. For the mind of the reader, always bent to pick up clues, receives no impression of reality or life, rather of an airless, elaborate mechanism, and the book remains enthralling, but insignificant, like a game of chess, not a work of human art. It seemed the cause might lie partly in the abrupt attack, and that if the tale were gradually approached, some of the characters introduced as it were beforehand, and the book started in the tone of a novel of manners and experience briefly treated, this defect might be lessened and our mystery seem to inhere in life. The tone of the age, its movement, the mingling of races and classes in the dollar hunt, the fiery and not quite unromantic struggle for existence with its changing trades and scenery, and two types in particular, that of the American handyman of business and that of the Yankee merchant sailor, we agreed to dwell upon at some length, and make the woof to our not very precious warp, hence Dodd's father, and Pinkerton, and Nereis, and the dromedary picnics, and the railway, work in New South Wales, the last and unsolicited testimonial from the powers that be, for the tale was half written before I saw Carthew's squad toil in the rainy cutting at South Clifton, or heard from the engineer of his young swell, after we had invented at some expense of time this method of approaching and fortifying our police novel. It occurred to us it had been invented previously by someone else, and was in fact, however painfully different the results may seem, the method of Charles Dickens in his later work. I see you staring. Here, you will say, is a prodigious quantity of theory to our halfpenny worth of police novel, and withal not a shadow of an answer to your question. Well, some of us like theory. After so long a piece of practice, these may be indulged for a few pages, and the answer is at hand. It was plainly desirable, from every point of view of convenience and contrast, that our hero and narrator should partly stand aside from those with whom he mingles and be but a pressed man in the dollar hunt. Thus it was that Loudon Dodd became a student of the plastic arts, and that our globe-trotting story came to visit Paris and look in at Barbizon. And thus it is, dear Lo, that your name appears in the address of this epilogue. For sure, if any person can here appreciate and read between the lines, it must be you and one other, our friend. All the dominoes will be transparent to your better knowledge. The statuary contract will be to you a piece of ancient history, and you will not have now heard for the first time of the dangers of Roussillon, dead leaves from the Bas Breo, echoes from Lavenues and the Rue Racine, memories of a common past. Let these be your bookmarkers as you read. And if you care for naught else in the story, be a little pleased to breathe once more, for a moment, the airs of our youth. The end. The end. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey, the characters, and the world they carried with them. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows more timeless books to be shared with listeners around the world. Until next time, thank you for listening.